in the daf. Ezra Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Bava Metzia daf Ayin Ches, and we're going to start from about 7 lines from the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amud Beis. Pretty straightforward Gemara. Va'amar Rava. Rava said, "Hi ma oisvei mezuzei lechavre." A man lends 100 zuz to his friend. Okay, you get a big loan of $1,000. Upare, okay, upare zuze, and he paid $1 at a time. Hi, Steve, we just began. Rava said in the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amud Beis that somebody lends 100 zuz to his friend, and instead of paying the whole amount at one time, he's slowly paying $1 at a time. This is one zuz at a time. So the Gemara says it's peiroin hava. It's considered as if you paid the loan, obviously. Ella, but there's a problem with that. The islay taroimis bagabe. The malva the lender can have complaints against the borrower, because the amalei, because he can tell the borrower, the fact that you're paying me $1 at a time, afsadintini minai, you're causing me a loss, because I could have watched, if you pay me $100, $1,000 at one shot, I take more care of it to watch that it doesn't get lost. But if you're paying me one zuz at a time, so I'm less careful about the return, and it's going to cause me a loss. I gave you the loan in one payment. You should try to pay me back in one payment. Then the Gemara says, Hahu Gavra. There was a story, a different story. The Zabin lechamora lechavre. He sold a donkey to his friend. Okay, he sold a donkey to his friend, and the purchaser paid for the donkey, except he was $1 short. Now you can see where the question is going. Is that called, because he's still $1 short? He doesn't acquire it yet. And it remained by the purchaser one zuz, and the seller is trying to call the owner and call the purchaser. It says, you still owe me one zuz for that donkey. So the question is like this: Yosef Rav Ashi v'kom ayin bay. Rav Ashi sat in the shiur, in the lecture, and he was examining this case. Ki hai gavna mai. What's the story about this kani? Does the purchaser acquire the donkey? I like kani, or he doesn't acquire the donkey? Because perhaps the seller does not agree to complete the sale unless he gets the full payment. And as long as there's one zuz that he's not paid for, and he's calling him up and says, you still owe me one zuz, the purchaser doesn't really own that donkey. And it could be that the seller can call back the whole transaction. Amalei Rav Mordechai Rav Ashi. So Rav Mordechai told Rav Ashi, Hachi Omar Avimi Mahagroina Mishmei Rava. Avimi from Hagroina said a statement in the name of Rava. Zuze, if you're missing one zuz, is kazuzei dam. It's as if you're missing a lot of zuz. In other words, v'loy kani. You're not going to be koined. It means the fact is that the purchaser didn't pay the full amount, and therefore it's as if the purchaser does not yet acquire the donkey. And just because you're missing one zuz, that's almost as if you're missing 50 zuz. It doesn't matter. You're not acquiring until you fully pay for the item. Amalei Rav Acha b'rei Rav Yosef Rav Ashi. So Rav Acha says to son of Rav Yosef says to Rav Ashi, you telling me in the name of Rava that it's not that the purchaser did not acquire it. But they say over in the name of Rava, Kani, that in this case you do acquire it. So we have a contradiction of what Rava said. Does the purchaser acquire it, or does he not acquire it? Amalei, so Rav Ashi answered Rav Acha, Tistargim Shmaticha. We go to the top of the page, that it's talking about that the guy who sold something and was missing one zuz, he sold a piece of land that was costing him a lot to keep. Like it was a very bad piece of land. And therefore, the truth is that even if the guy didn't pay for the zuz, he still would have sold it, because the type of piece of land was causing the owner a loss. The taxes may have been high on this piece of land, and he can't do anything. So therefore, really, the purchaser acquired it even before he paid the full amount, because the seller was eager to sell it. So if the seller is eager to sell it, then why was he pursuing him for that one zuz? Because he thought that he doesn't want the purchaser to back out of the transaction. So he pursued the purchaser, pay me that 1 zuz. So in your mind, you purchaser will not back out of this transaction. But in his mind, the seller's mind, he was really willing to sell it for much less. Now the Gemara discusses a question. Pshita. To me, the Gemara says, is speaking out loud. It is simple in our mind that boil is abune b'meya. A man wants to sell. He needed 100 zuz, so he wanted to sell a small piece of land that he has for 100 zuz. And v'loy ashkach, there was no buyers for the small piece of land that he had. V'zaben, so therefore he sold a 200 zuz land. Now he needed 100 zuz, but in the end he couldn't find somebody to buy his 100 zuz land, so he sold the 200 zuz ad. But the guy who purchased the 200 zuz land didn't pay him full. So therefore, as long as the seller of that 200 zuz land is pursuing him, loy kani, the purchaser did not acquire the land. Why? Because really, you can see already that the seller did not want to sell that 200 zuz land. His original intention was to sell the 100 zuz land. So now the question is, here comes the question. Ella, here's the following case. If he wanted to sell 100 zuz land, he needed 100 zuz, but he couldn't find anybody immediately to buy it. And he put out a posting, a street easy posting or whatever. But the tarach, if he worked very hard and got on the phone and contacted other people, hava mashkich, he would have found a purchaser. He would have found a buyer. Veloy tarach, and he did not work hard to find somebody to buy it, to buy that piece of land. Instead, v'zabim Messiah, he took the easy way out and sold his 200 zuz of land. And now he's pursuing the guy who he sold the 200 zuz land for that last zuz. Would you say that the purchaser acquired the 200 zuz land, although he still owes him 1 zuz? Is it like as if he sold his land because he wants to get rid of it? Because you see that he wasn't really wanting to keep this 200 zuz land. Because if he really wanted to keep the 200 zuz land, he would have worked hard to find a purchaser for his 100 zuz land. The fact that he sold the 200 zuz land, maybe in his mind, he just wants to get rid of this big property. And therefore, even if the purchaser did not pay the full price, he still considered acquiring. He still acquired it. Or would you say not so? Not so. The fact is that he's pursuing him for that last zuz. You only paid me 199. You owe me 200. And if that indicates that he doesn't really want to sell that line that land until he gets the full price. Teku, the Gemara leaves that unresolved. Now the Gemara goes back to Sochar as a chama as a kader, Sochar alein oimaton. Okay? So now, let's say you hired a wagon driver, right? And then he quit in the middle of the job, and it cost you a loss because you have no one, you have no one to complete the job. It has to be done today. Let's say, you have a deadline for transporting goods from one place to another. And in the middle of the transport, the donkey driver quits. So either you could hire new donkey drivers, and even if it costs you a fortune to hire new donkey drivers to finish the job, you can bill the previous donkey driver for the loss that he caused you. Or you can fool them and say, I'm going to pay you more, continue on, and then don't pay them more. So we said, soicher aleim, you can hire new donkey drivers and bill the first donkey drivers and bill them. Ad kama soicher aleim. How much can you charge the first donkey driver? Let's say you're not going to hire somebody for millions of dollars and then bill the first donkey drivers. Amar Rav Nachman ad kedei scharam. You can bill them for what you owe them. Let's say they worked half the job, and so that amount that you still owe them, that's the amount you can bill them for the second half of the job that you're going to have to double pay for somebody to complete the job. Eisvei Rav Nachman. So Rav said to Rav Nachman, I have a question. The Brisa says, Ad boim b'chamishim zuz. There's a Brisa that seems you can go as much as you want. 40, 50 zuz. You can charge the previous donkey driver as much as 50 zuz. You can just bill them, just hire somebody to complete the job, and it's their fault. Amalei. So Rav Nachman explained to Rava, Hitanyahi. When was that explained? When he's holding on to some package belonging to the wagon driver. Let's say the wagon driver came and left some tools by you. So once you already have something like a mashkin in your possession, so besides paying for a new wagon driver to complete the job, whatever you owe him, but now you could also confiscate the items that he put in your watch, the items that you're watching on his behalf. And that's the way you can afford to pay 40, 50 zuz to hire new workers because to complete the job, because the first donkey drivers, went on strike and didn't complete the job. Okay, new Mishnah. Here we're going to talk about a renter, and he didn't follow the renter's contract. The Mishnah says if you rent the donkey, and the condition in the contract was you could only ride this donkey on the mountain, and he took the donkey and went to the valley. Bebika, who hired this donkey, could only go in the valley. And you brought it onto a mountain. Even you went to the top of the mountain. You carried it to the top of the mountain, and it walked on top of the mountain. So you would think that there is no difference between it walking in a valley and walking on top of a mountain. You used the mileage was the same. You went for 10 miles. In each, you were a right to go 10 miles, but you took it to the wrong place. You were not allowed to take it. If you were told to take it in the mountain, you're not allowed to take it in the valley. If you're told to take it in the valley, you're not allowed to take it into the mountain. So the Mishnah says, V'mesa, and then all of a sudden the donkey died. Chayev, the renter has to pay for a new donkey. It seems obvious. But let's say the Mishnah says, now the Mishnah seems to say the same case, but then qualifies the Mishnah and gives you it not so fast. It depends how the donkey died. You rented a donkey to make it go on the mountain. And what happened was you took the donkey to go in the valley. Okay, now im hechalika, let's say the donkey slipped in the valley. Now, in the valley, it's not so slippery there. On a mountain, it could be slippery. You could slip on a rock, on an edge, on a cliff. So if it slipped and fell in the valley, potter, you're not obligated to pay, even though you were not supposed to take it into the bika. But the slippery risk, the slip risk, is higher on the mountain than in the valley. So you took it to a place where you have less risk. So therefore, the renter is not obligated to pay. But if the donkey suffered a heat stroke, chayev, then you're obligated to pay, because there's heat stroke. There's less of a probability of heat stroke on a mountain than on a valley. And if you took it to the valley, you were negligent, and therefore you're obligated to pay for a new donkey. The contract says to put it into a valley, and you brought it to a mountain. So now it's the opposite. If it slipped, chayev, because you took it from a low risk slip risk, which was low from the valley, and you brought it to a mountain. So therefore, the renter is chayev. But if it got a heat stroke on top of the mountain, well, you in the valley, it certainly would have gotten a heat stroke because it's more humid in the valley. So therefore, you're pata. Now, the machmas hamala. Here, until now, we're talking about you actually carried the donkey to walk on top of a mountain. But let's say that if the reason why the donkey died of a heat stroke is because it had to climb the mountain, so then that's more than a heat stroke risk that it would have been in the valley, and therefore chayev, the renter, is obligated to pay by causing the donkey to go up the mountain. Now the Mishnah says, if you rented a donkey, the hivrika, and it got an eye ailment, and now it's blind. So the question is, does the one who rented the donkey, the one who rented the donkey to the renter, does he have to replace that donkey with a new donkey? It's not like an Avis car will they replace the car. Here, in this case, the person will not have to replace it. He'll tell the renter, it's your luck. Or if it was confiscated temporarily by the government, and you have to wait till you get it back. So the question is the owner of the donkey obligated to bashtel, to supply another donkey to take its place? No, not true. It's your donkey. You rented this donkey, and it's your mazel. That's it. Deal with this donkey that went blind. I don't have to supply you with another donkey. But let's say the donkey died or got injured. Then the owner has to replace the donkey with another donkey. Now the Gemara says, in the Reisha of the Mishnah, it says the same case if you violated the lease agreement and you took the donkey from the mountain to the valley, no matter what, you're obligated to pay. And then the second part of the Mishnah says not so fast. Depends how it died. If it died of a slip fall or a heat stroke. Why in the beginning of the Mishnah, it's automatically considered you violated the lease agreement, you're obligated to pay. So the Gemara is going to give you 4 answers. Amri debei Rabyani explained, Reisha, the beginning of the Mishnah, that says you right away always obligated to pay, is shemeichu machmas aver. It didn't die because of a heat stroke. It didn't die because it tripped, but what it died was because of the atmosphere. So the Amrina, we could say that he was specifically, it like just fainted. And that's the reason. Avira dahar katale, that the reason why it died is because the atmosphere on the mountain killed the donkey. Vamrinan avira debika katale, or we can say the atmosphere on the valley killed him. So therefore, it's by violating that lease agreement, you automatically are negligent because the owner knew that the mountain is dangerous for this donkey, the atmosphere on the mountain, or the atmosphere on the valley is dangerous from the mountain. And therefore, if you violated that lease agreement, you're obligated to pay. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says, "Is kagoin shemeichsma machmas uftsana." It died because it got of exhaustion. And therefore, if you brought it to a mountain, you could say to him, the fact that you schlepped it up the mountain, that really, therefore, it got exhausted. And therefore, when it started walking on the mountain, normally, it still was exhausted from the climb of the mountain. And therefore, it got exhausted under its load and died. And the same holds true in the opposite. If you change it around to take it to a valley, even though we didn't see anything that it got sweaty, and it wasn't very hot outside, we can say like this: if you took it to the mountain, the atmosphere that was there would have given it like extra boost, and it wouldn't be tired. Now that you took it to a valley, there's no atmosphere there, and therefore it was missing that energy, and that's why it collapsed. Rabba says, Rabba says it's talking about where it got bitten by a snake. So there, the owner knew, don't take it to this place, but he didn't tell you why. But now you know why, because he knew there were snakes there. Therefore, if you violated the lease agreement, you're automatically obligated to pay. There's no exemption here. Rabbi Chia bar Abba, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, has a new version. He says that if you violate the lease agreement, you're obligated to pay. It doesn't matter because Hamani, the author of the Mishnah, is Rameir. The beginning of the Mishnah is Rameir. The Omar, Rameir has this new statement called Hamav al Dashal Balabais. If you violate an agreement with the owner, that means you violated the renter's agreement, no matter what, even if it was low risk that something should happen, we go to Amud Beis, Nikra Gazlin, automatically you're considered a thief. And therefore, it's considered that you stole the donkey, and therefore, no matter what happens, you're obligated to pay. So this is an odd teretz because the beginning of the Mishnah is the author is Rav Meir, and the end of the Mishnah is Rabbanan. That even if you violated lease agreement, the renter's agreement, you're not considered a gazlan. It's not like you're kind of the animal. Hey, Rav Meir. So the Gemara just asks a question: which Rav Meir said that if you violate an agreement, it automatically becomes yours? Are we referring to Rav Meir of the dyer? The time we learned in the Mishnah, a person gives white wool litzaba to a dyer. He gave him strict instructions to dye the wool red. Utzvoi shachar, and he dyed it black. Shachar, he gave the instruction was to dye it black. Utzvoi edem, and he dyed it red. Rab Meir basically, Rab Meir says that the dyer is a crook. He violated the instructions, and therefore he has to just pay the value of white wool to the owner of the wool, and the dyed wool now becomes the dyer's. Rabbi Yehuda says not so fast. Rabbi Yehuda says you return the dyed wool, but the guy who gave you the wool to dye pays you less. It depends. Maybe he'll pay for the expenses, maybe he'll pay for the appreciation, but he pays a lesser price. So we see from there that Rameir says if you violate instructions, you become a ganav. Says the Gemara, Mimai, how do you know that Rameir always says that? Dilma, maybe only there is the exception, because when the dyer violated the instructions, he did an action. He dyed it the wrong color. He did an action by coloring the wool. So therefore, he becomes a gazlan. But just because you violate a renter's agreement, taking it in a place where you're not supposed to, doesn't necessarily mean that you become a gazlan and it becomes yours. Ella ha Rameir. The following Rameir says that if you the following case of Rameir, the Migmas Purim, the collections that the shul collects for people for poor people to have the Sudas Purim. Tanya, we learned in Brisa, Migmas Purim, when you collect for Purim money, Purim, you have to distribute it on Purim. Migmas, if you collect for one city, you have to collect it. It has to be distributed for people in that city. You can't just now make a bait and switch and now give it to somebody who lives in Brooklyn. The aim medaktikim, you don't have to be so pedantic about it. And so, for example, you collect it for Purim. So most of the money, you take all the money that you collected for Purim, you buy calves and you distribute the meat. But let's say there's extra meat left over, you sell it, then you sell the extra meat, which you thought was going to go for Purim meals. Now that's left over, you collect it now, you sell it, and now you can distribute the money that you received to other needy causes. But Rabbi Lezer, Omer, Migbas Purim lePurim. If you collect for Purim, it can only be used for Purim. Ve'ena ani rishon likach be'ratzul sandalei. And a poor person cannot use it to sell it to buy a shoelace for his shoe. Elam kain hispa b'mam ashir divrei Yaakov shomer Rab Meir. So here, Rab Meir said, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel Megal. Here, Rab Meir says, no. If you collect it for Purim, if there's left over, you have to sell it and save it for next year Purim. But you cannot now change it and use it for other needy causes. So we see from Rab Meir, once you have strict instructions, you have to stay with those instructions. So the same thing over here. Rab Meir is the author of the Mishnah, and the beginning of the Mishnah, that once a renter violated the renter's agreement, becomes a ganav. So the Gemara says, not so. Over there, the guy who donated the money, his specific intention was that it should be used for Purim. And if it's not used for Purim, return it to him. But here, when someone rented the donkey, the owner that rented the donkey to the renter, he just said, I'm renting you the donkey. I want you to have the donkey. Just I'm giving you a side instruction, only take it this way and not don't go in don't take it to the mountain, not to the valley. So, but that doesn't mean that if you violate that, you become a ganav. Maybe that's since the renter wanted that to happen. So Ella Harameir. Where do we see the following case of Rameir? Tanya, we learned in the Brisa of Shimon Lazar Mishum Rameir. Shimon Lazar says the name Rameir. Hanoisin Dina Laani Likach Loicholek Loikach by Talis Loikach by Cholek They Shma Valdata Shabalabayis. Here's a clear example. I give money to a poor person to buy a shirt. So he should not buy a talis with it. If I give him money to buy a talis, he should not buy a white shirt with it. So we see, Rameir clearly says you cannot violate the instructions, and if you violate the instructions, you're a ganav. So the Gemara says, no, there, you're not allowed to violate the instructions because the Dilma Shana Hosan, the Alshan the Michshade, the Amre Ishi, Amre Plani Zavin Le Levush Le Plani Ani, Leizavanle. In Izami Zavle Glim of Leizavanle. there, if you violated the instructions of the guy that gave you the money, is because he doesn't want people to accuse him, because he said, I'm giving money to this person to buy a shirt. If he goes and buys a tallis with it, people are going to accuse the giver as making empty donations, empty commitments. So therefore, he was specific that you have to follow through on the instructions that he gave you, because he doesn't want to look bad. And so only in that case, you must follow the instructions, and if not, you're a ganef. But maybe by the renter, you won't be considered a ganef. So the Gemara says, "In Cain, listen to Chashad, my nation maval dato shalabayis, shmamino shum deshanihu v'chol maval dato shalabayis nikra them." The question is that here, clearly the Brisa says that it's only because he didn't follow the instructions of the owner. And it didn't say because the donor is going to be accused that he's making empty commitments. It clearly says that because you didn't follow the owner's instructions, that's why you're considered a gazlan. So here we see the source of Rameir: whoever violates the owner's instructions is considered to be a ganef. A half a minute more, and let's see what the Brisa says. The Mishnah says if you rented a donkey and the hivrika, something happened with the animal became blind. So my hivrika, what does it mean that the animal became blind? It became blind. That's what it means. That's hivrika. Let's say I think it's lightning, but it means the opposite of lightning, which is blindness. Rava says avazekes. Rava says it means worms ate up bacteria, ate up the animal, and now it's a weaker animal. And therefore, the Mishnah says that if the animal became weak, you don't have to provide a new animal. Let's finish off with this story, and then we'll stop. Ahu da'amalei avazekes b'milsa demalka. There was a guy who said avazekes ate up the clothing of the king. Avazekis, again, is a worm, a moth that devours the clothing of the king. Amr le b'mai. So they asked him, they wanted to see if he's not making up a story. How do you know? They asked him, what clothing of the king? Betlei kesef or betlei dahab? Was it his silver clothing, which means his linen clothing, or betlei dahab, or his gold clothing, which doesn't mean gold, it means wool that's dyed in gold. So he said, oh, the moths ate up the linen clothing. Amar ukratlu, they killed him, because these avzekes don't eat linen clothing. Linen is something that the moths are not going to eat. So they knew he was lying, and he was just trying to make himself important to get in to see the king. He was saying that it was the gold, it was the wool clothing that's dyed purple, dyed the gold color. That's what this avazekes eat. So they go shvaku, and they let him go. They knew he might be telling the truth. But the point is, avazekes is a worm that makes the donkey weaker. And if it makes the donkey weaker, nevertheless, the owner does not have to provide a new donkey. He could say to the renter, listen, it's your luck, and that's it, deal with it. Okay, we'll stop over here.